So if we could start with your full name, please.
Robert Thomas May.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio on March 27th, 1921.
So how old are you today?
I'm 97 years old.
And which branch of the military did you serve with?
I was in the U.S. Navy. I'm an officer in the Naval Reserve.
And what was your rate or rank in the Navy?
Lieutenant junior grade.
And did you serve aboard ship?
I aboard LST 348.
And what was your job aboard that LST?
Several, but the most important one, most significant, was the Navigator.
And what other responsibilities did you have?
As first lieutenant. First lieutenant is the one who's in charge of repair and maintenance. Swabbed the decks. I had 38 people work for me in my crew. They paint the ship, they clean the decks, they load and unload. We had 100 people altogether, but 38 of them reported to me as the first lieutenant is the loading officer. So I was in charge of loading and then discharging. See, we would carry about 90 vehicles on an LST, 55 tanks and 40 other vehicles. And we could unload in 45 minutes. The tanks would be ashore within 15 minutes of hitting the shore. We would hit a beach and slide right up so that when we lowered our ramp, most of the time they were on dry land. But once in a while, one time we got caught on a sandbar and we were 400 feet from shore and they had to bring pontoons out for us to unload. In the meantime, the Germans were popping 88s at us at regular intervals, probably 100 of them, but not one of them hit us. They couldn't seem to get us in range. There was another LST. We had 300 LSTs that went in on the landing in Salerno. Two of us hit sandbars, so we're stuck, can't move. And we're not at the shore, and the water's 8 feet deep, so we can't unload. So they had to build a pontoon bridge from shore out. Well, that took about 4 hours.
All while they're getting shot at.
Yeah, in the meantime, we got 88s popping shells at us. The other LST got hit with 3 of them, but we didn't get hit at all. They just kept falling around us. We had that happen about, well, later on we were a repair ship. I had good ship fitters, and these are welders and so forth, and they were good enough that we became a repair ship. And we would have, at Anzio, for instance, we'd have as many as 15 LCDTs as a 40-foot vehicle carrier tied up, getting repairs. And they dropped bombs on us. They hit them, but they never hit us. We had 135 air raids in which 6 bombs were dropped each time, and not one of them hit us. It hit some of the ships that were small ships that were around us, but not one of us. Now it's quite a feeling to look up and see the bombs coming and wait for the explosion. We also had 2 torpedoes that were launched against us. We only had a draft of 3 feet. Torpedoes went right under us. See a torpedo bomber come at you. Now we never shot a plane down coming at us. But when the plane comes in at 600 miles an hour, then it goes up. It slows to about 100 miles an hour. Then you can pop them. And we shot down 20 planes that had dropped bombs on us. But that's part of the story. Yeah.
All right. And what years did you serve from and until?
I went on active duty in April 1st of 43, and I was discharged May of 46.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about your childhood growing up. You said Cleveland, Ohio, correct?
Okay, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. And my father was an attorney and also an engineer. I went to college, had a scholarship to Case Western Reserve University, and graduated with a bachelor's degree in business. I joined the Navy in my sophomore year in order to complete my education, and then 3 weeks after I graduated, I went into active duty. My active duty started in April. Let's see, wait a minute. Yeah, April of 43. I enlisted in 41. Enlisted the day before Pearl Harbor, but that was in order to finish college. And then I went in active duty on April 1st of 43, and I got out May 15th of 46. So I was in for 3 years.
Now, growing up during the Great Depression, did your family experience any hardships during that time?
Well, it was the Depression, and my father was laid off, and frankly, I had 3 paper routes, and I'm going to say that my paper routes fed the family for about 6 months. That he had no income whatsoever, but he had a very tough time for the 4 or 5 years of the Depression. Finally got a job and went back to work in the end of the Depression, let's see, about 1940, he went back to work full time, but he was, times were pretty this. And I want to say that, may sound funny, but my paper route put food on the table. And my dad says, look, every penny you spend is going into your college fund. So he kept track of it, and that became my college fund. Because he said, I don't have money to pay for college. You're going to have to do it on your own. But I'll pay back the money you forwarded to us to keep the family in food. They went 2 years without any payments on their house, just praying that the lender would not foreclose on them. So it was a tough period. And as I say, I ended up with 3 paper routes. You're only supposed to have 1. Oh, this is Beverly Tannenbaum.
Hello.
Hi, Beverly.
He's here for an interview on
For what?
the honor trip, you remember I made?
Oh, that's a, you did tell me something like that.
And he's here to take some pictures and get a story on my background and so forth. So you're on your own. There's some orange juice, but you're on your own.
What was that?
You're on your own to make breakfast.
Tough. I don't like that. That's all right. I gotta take care of him. It's very important. He's a good man.
Yeah, we've been together. We're not married, but we've been together, living together for about 2 years. 3 years we dated, and then finally, my wife died, and then 6 months, and she lived in this unit. I was in another unit here. My wife died, and so we dated for about 3 years.
I had a husband too. He died.
Yeah, her husband died, and so we ended up getting together. So it's a good story, you know. Two loving people found each other.
Well, that's a beautiful thing.
Well,
Yeah.
what are you interviewing him for?
Well, I'm working on a book. I'm putting a book together. It's a compilation of 100 World War II veterans. So it'll be their portraits and then biographies of each. So.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So we may jump back and forth, but that's all right. I hope you get it all.
No problem.
But no, during the Depression, I say we had a hard time, and you were only supposed to have one paper route because they were competing papers. But I found out one was a morning paper, one was an afternoon paper, and the other was an evening paper. So they didn't know that I had 3 paper routes, but it was very successful, and that kept the family going for about 4 years of the Depression. When my dad had loaned me about $4,000.
Do you remember how old you were at the time?
Well, I see, I was about 15, 16, 17 years old. And they said one paper route wasn't enough. I was able to have 3 different paper routes because they were different timing.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
I have a brother who also was in the Air Force. He was a navigator on a B-29. He had a strange. He went in before he graduated from high school. 5 months before he graduated from high school, they called him up, and he went into the meteorology program at the University of Virginia. At the end of 2 years, they canceled the program, and he went into the Air Force as a navigator. Both of us in the same field, you know, both were good at math, and apparently that was attractive. And his plane finally went to Iwo Jima, went to Saipan, and he dropped one of those planes that dropped the plane on Iwo Jima, and one of the atomic bombs. But then they stayed over there for a year, mostly dropping food to prisoners of war in the different Japanese camps.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another story.
So was your brother working as well to help support the family when you
Oh
were
yeah,
home?
he helped me peddle papers. I had 400 Sunday morning papers, and he helped me peddle the papers. And if I wasn't there or I went someplace, he had to cover me. And then when I went to college, he took over.
Did that feel like a heavy weight on your shoulder, being a 14, 15-year-old boy and having the responsibility of...
No, I just accepted that. That was one of the things that my family believed in, was everybody picks up and does whatever they can do. I had a couple of jobs in addition to that, but with, well, for instance, 400 customers on Sunday morning.
Big responsibility.
Yeah, and my brother worked with me. My dad helped me as well. But it was nice because he said every penny you spent is going to go to your college fund. Of course, when I got to that age, he says, I haven't got the money. I haven't got $4,000 to give you, but I'll give you so much per month. But that was that's where my college fund came from. I had 2 scholarships, but in addition to that, the scholarships were only 50%. But I was able to take extra courses. You normally carried 15 or 16 hours, and I carried 21 hours because it was free. You normally had to pay like $60 an hour. But being on a scholarship, I was able, tuition at that time was only $300 a semester. And I had a scholarship for half of that. And you know, you do everything you can.
Might as well take advantage of it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you ended up graduating high school,
I
going
graduated,
to college?
Yeah, and then I went to college for, well, about 3 years, 3.5 years, because I was in the Navy. I was on an accelerated course. So when I graduated from college in February, and I went into active duty, and then I was in the Navy Reserve for 2 years in college, so I could have a deferment. And then when that was over, a month after I graduated from college, I went into active duty to midshipman school and got my commission. And very surprisingly, was sent overseas 5 days after I got my commission.
So the incentive for you to join the Navy was
to be able to stay in school.
Right. Did you have was there any inclination that you may end up going to war?
Oh, certainly. Fully expected it.
Because you said you enlisted or joined the day before Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was peacetime.
But you know, the draft was in effect.
Right.
So I might have been drafted, but by joining the Navy Reserve, I could stay in school until I graduated.
Got it.
But then a month after I graduated, ping, I'm in active duty as midshipman school, and 4 months later have a commission. So it was a good deal.
Do you remember the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked?
December 7th. I enlisted on December 6th.
Do you remember where you were when you got the news?
Yep. My father and mother and I were watching TV, and we watched Pearl Harbor. And I know my mother and dad both said, "Will they call you up immediately now?" That I said, "No, they promised me I was going to be able to graduate." And so I was able to stay in school for 2 years under a Navy in Navy Reserve, and then go to active duty when I got out. And I graduated in February and went in the Navy active duty on April 1st. So we didn't waste any time.
And then once you went to active duty, where did you go for your
midshipman school?
Yeah.
in Northwestern University.
And what was that experience like?
Good morning.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I was very active in scouting, and I was an Eagle Scout, and that gave me a tremendous background, and I think it made me a better officer in the Navy, and I knew things that most of the other officers didn't know. For instance, I knew how to shoot the stars. I knew, what star are you going to shoot? We didn't have an officer on our ship that knew anything about the stars. Well, I had studied stars as part of my scouting. Scouting was very, very helpful all the way through my career in the Navy. And Regal is the shoulder of Orion, and that's one of the best stars to use. Well, nobody else on the ship knew what I was talking about when I said, "Well, we shoot the stars. How do you do that?" And which star? I said, "Well, I'll use Regal." What's that? But it was background that I had that helped. And in fact, I conducted a course. Most of the navigators had no idea about this. I had star charts that I brought, and I made copies of it, and we had a meeting of about 30 navigators from we had 300 LSTs operating in our group. And we'd have meetings from time to time on what's happening and what we do and so forth. Well, I conducted meetings in navigation because I was more aware of the stars, and through scouting, it gave me a background that was much better than any of the others had had. But put you in a ship as a navigator and say, "Now you're a navigator." Yeah, sure. What does that mean? I know my first assignment, because of being a navigator, I had a 3.99 in navigation in midshipman school. So, ping! That's what we immediately sent overseas. And I get aboard a ship, and 5 days later we leave for the Salerno invasion, in which there were about 2,000 ships, 350 LSTs, and we were the lead ship. So my navigating led them to this. Let me tell you, that's a horrible feeling. Never had it respond. Didn't really know what I was doing in terms of navigating, but I was good at it, and we ended up, when you're going for a landing, you drop anchor about 4 o'clock in the morning. You let the troops go ashore. We carried 500 troops. We'd send 250 ashore, and then at daybreak we'd hit the beach. Well, that was the first time we knew whether we were in the right place or not. So at 4 o'clock we're letting people off, letting 250 men go ashore. All the ships did this, all 300. So that's a lot of men going ashore. And I don't think I fully appreciated the responsibility, because they didn't realize that they were all taking their bearing on us. If I missed, a lot of people missed, because we put 100,000 men ashore. And it was, as I say, it was my navigating that took us to where we were. And when the daybreak came, our charts were very good. And there was a church and a school that I could pick up on the map, and we were in the right place. But from 4 o'clock until daybreak, about 6:30, I didn't really know if we were in the right place or not. But in the meantime, 100,000 men are going ashore, mostly based on my navigating.
And you had mentioned to me earlier your experience navigating was prior to this.
Yes, I had in scouting. I had mapping and things like that, which gave me if you've never done it, it's kind of hard to learn. But if you've done it and worked with maps, then it's easy. And I know we had a quartermaster who was an enlisted man, who was very good, but he wasn't good. He didn't know everything. I knew more than he did, even though I was his senior and navigator. But I had to check his work and correct it a few times. And he'd say, well, why did you do this? Well, see, you have to correct for wind, current, and compass error. So you're correcting for 3 different things. And in most cases, we'd have a 20 or 30 degree wind. And LST is all freeboard, 3 feet under the water and 20 feet out of the water. So that's like a big sailboat. And the wind has a tremendous effect on your sailing. It's like a sailboat being pushed out of, and you have to compensate for that. And then you got a 6 degree compass error, and then you have about a 6 to 8 degree current that's carrying you. And you have to take all those things into consideration. And all I can say is we made 17 trips into Salerno from Africa into Italy, leaving Bizerti, Africa, and into Italy. And we always got to the right place. And then when we went into Anzio, we had a similar experience. We made 12 trips in. See, we would carry 500 Army and about 90 vehicles. We could carry a combat load with 55 tanks and 40 other vehicles, support vehicles like 10-wheelers with ammunition and ambulances and jeeps and things like that. We carry those on the main deck. In the tank deck would be the tanks. And we could unload tanks in 15 minutes. We could unload 55 tanks in 15 minutes. Now, if you take 350 LSTs, all unloading 55 tanks each, you got about 5,500 tanks, all hitting the beach within a short period of time. It's a traffic jam, really, but that was the invasions of Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio. Sicily was kind of a dry run, but we made 17 trips into Salerno and 12 trips into Anzio.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said after you landed in Africa, it was only a matter of days until...
5 days. Okay. Before I was on the ship for 5 days when we had to take off, and I didn't know it at the time that I was the chief navigator.
And prior to that, your experience on a ship was what?
When I crossed the ocean, I was on an LST, and the skipper said there were 4 of us, like myself. He says, "Why don't you fellas work with us?" And so I had 4 days of experience working with a navigator, and that was my sea duty, was that 30-day trip across the ocean. So I did have some experience, but never expected that I would be the chief navigator for in Anzio, 3,000 ships. Because when we dropped anchor, all the ships dropped anchor in a position. And supposedly we were in the right place. But it's been like we left Naples at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It got dark at 5, and it's dark. And everybody took a zigzag course. So there's the Germans up above were looking at us. They say, "What the hell are crazy chickens? Where are they going?" And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, we rendezvoused and all came together, and 3,000 ships went in. And again, as I say, it was my navigating. I don't think I fully appreciated it until I talk about it. that it was my navigating. It was everybody was going by.
It's a pretty big responsibility.
It is. You know, for a young kid, I was only 22 years old.
It's something to be proud of as well.
Well, I have to say there's a lot of luck to it, because you can't claim to be everything. I know. See, the executive officer on our ship was supposed to be the navigator, and he was an ex-Navy man. He'd been in the Navy, but it had been 14 years that he'd been a civilian, and he'd forgotten everything he knew. And he was very complimentary to me, but and the quartermaster were trained people just for that purpose. But then they reported to the navigator. But we made, let's see, 17 trips back and forth. It was a 4-day trip from Africa to Italy, and then 4 days going back.
So can you talk to me about the initial landing at Salerno?
Yes, on September 7th, 1943.
And what was that experience like? You guys dropped anchor, you said at 4 a.m.?
Well, yes. We hit a sandbar 400 feet from shore. 300 LSTs, and 2 of us hit sandbars. The others all went in and unloaded. But we sat on the sandbar with an 88 firing it at us. Now, the ship next to us, there were 2 of us hit sandbars. The ship next to us took 3 hits. About 12 men were killed and a lot of damage. They fired about 30 88 shells at us, and not one of them hit us. They flapped all over. We had 1,000 holes in the hull. From when they exploded, they would hit the show. But not one of them hit us. We thought, boy, we're blessed. We were blessed up until the German torpedo hit us.
But there's nothing you can do but pray that one doesn't land on you while they're...
That's right. I'll tell you, we had no chaplain on the ship, and when the skipper found out I'd been in scouting, he said, "Could you be our chaplain?" So we had a service. The first time we had 5 on Sunday morning, 11 o'clock. We had 5. After three weeks of this, the 3rd week we had 50. And the biggest question was, how do I pray? And if I pray, how do I know somebody's listening? You know, some very serious questions. But if you think about it, how do I pray? And is somebody listening? But I would say half the ship that came to me and asked me, how do I pray? You have a responsibility to give them an answer. Even though you're not really in a position to do it, you got to figure out what to tell them.
Were you a religious?
I was man? Well, yes. I was not a minister or anything, but I was very active in the church, and I was scoutmaster of the scout troop that was in the church. So when we came to the youth group, they elected me chairman of the youth group, and so I had a lot of experience there, and I tell you, once you know, having been a scoutmaster and then leader in a church and so forth, you pick up enough knowledge. Now, nobody on the ship had a Bible. I had a small First Testament, but no Bible. I was the only one on the ship that even had that little folding one, you know, not much more than that, but it was the First Testament. And we would hold a service, 11 o'clock, half-hour service every Sunday morning, that we were at sea. When we were in land, we could go to a church, and there would be a chaplain. But when we were at sea, I acted as the chaplain. And as a result, I didn't have any experience in that. So I just asked the fellows, tell me a story. And it was kind of confessional. Mm-hmm. And so we'd have about 50 guys, and maybe 5, 8 of them would get up and tell a story about their experience in the service. And it served a purpose. When we were in the small boat, for instance, after we bailed out and I was picked up in a small boat, there were about 10 of us. They said, Mr. May, say a prayer. So I said, God, help us home safely. An hour later, when we were picked up by a British hospital ship, as I walked up the ramp, several of them said, thank God for us, as if I was a messenger. Now, those are things that kind of stick with you. And you say, thanks God for giving me the ability to be able to do that. And as I say, probably 30 men on the trip came to me, and the biggest question was, how do I pray? This is, and you know, sure, I was a church leader, but I was not really qualified, but I served the purpose.
Now, you mentioned you made 17 landings.
Yes, this is from Africa, into Italy. Mm-hmm. We left Missouri in North Africa, and we would load, our load would be 500 Army and about 90 vehicles.
And that's each trip?
Oh, each trip, yeah. And it would be 300 LSTs. So we're carrying a lot of men, only 500 each, but you know, we're carrying 30,000 people, men. And we carried the British, we worked with the British for about the first 4 trips. Well, the second, third, fourth, and fifth trip, and then we went back to the Americans. But the British needed help, so there were 30 of us that were transferred over there. The fact that, who's the leader? They go by date, they were all captains. All the captains were full lieutenants. So which one's going to be the leader? They go by date of rank. And the date of rank of our captain, of our skipper, was about 6 months or a year before any of the others. So we became the convoy commodore, whether we were prepared for it or not. So all of the LSTs, roughly about 300, all went together. And it would be, well, actually in Anzio, I know we counted 3,000 ships. This is with the Liberty ships, the LSIs, the LSTs, the LCIs. And they say we put 100,000 men ashore within 4 hours. That's a real workforce.
It's hard to fathom what that actually would. I said it's hard to fathom what that would actually look like.
It is, yeah. I have some pictures here somewhere, but which were very good of a landing in the Pacific. Well, in fact, that thing I gave you, mm-hmm. on the last page of that, see, there's an LST, and there's landing. It's showing how they're landing. See, we would slide right up on the beach, lower the ramp, and the men would go ashore. In many cases, now here they had to walk in the water, but in Anzio, we'd hit at high tide, so we'd wait up on the beach, lower the ramp, and they'd be on dry land drive the tanks and vehicles. Our normal load would be 55 tanks and 40 other trucks, but we carried everything. One of the LSTs carried 1,000 donkeys, for instance. They got stuck in the mountain, and so from Africa to Italy, one of them had 1,000 donkeys. They just put straw on the deck, and they were aboard for 3 days. Another LST carried 3,500 Italian prisoners of war that when Italy dropped out, they all gave up, and they put 3,500 of them on one of the LSTs and took them all back to Sicily. LSTs were the strangest ship, I'll tell you.
Multi-purpose.
They were basically built for the invasion of France, the invasion of Normandy, for instance. And we were scheduled to go to Normandy, but the torpedo caught us in the meantime. But so we were being briefed for the landing in Normandy, and I knew exactly where we were going to be assigned and so forth, but we didn't make it because the Germans put a torpedo in us. There were 1,800 LSTs made. 500 went to the European theater, 500 went to the Pacific, and the others were all around. But so our basic complement was the 500 LSTs. But if you consider the fact that they could carry 500 men each, they could carry 5,500 tanks and 40 other vehicles. That's putting, and you have 350 of them, all hit the beach and can unload the tanks in 12 minutes. They full load, including all the men, in 45 minutes. You're putting 500 men and 90 vehicles ashore.
It's pretty tough to stop.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you consider that and the LSTs were built just for that purpose, that's all. And they scrapped them all when the war was over.
And you mentioned earlier that you experienced dive bombers coming in, dropping
yes.
torpedoes. And
well, we acted, I had two good ship fitters, and they went aboard some of the ships that were sunk and salvaged items. For instance, they found electric welders. We had gas welders, electric welders with a cable, 700-foot cable. It's, you know, a wonderful crew. So they made us a repair ship. So after our second trip into Anzio, we stayed at Anzio for 2 weeks. During that period, we had 135 air raids, in which 6 bombs were dropped each time. Now that's a lot of bombs to watch coming down and wait for the explosion. And then not one of them hit us. They missed every time. You thank God. How did that happen? We had other LSTs that got hit pretty bad, and it would blow the ship up. And I think it was almost feeling like, boy, you gotta bless things. God's help that they're helping you. And then we stopped the torpedo, 2 torpedoes, and it really blew the thing up. And the load we were carrying was the worst load you could possibly carry. We were carrying 1,000 drums of gasoline and 500 drums of smoke oil. And the second torpedo hit right under those. They said the flames went 700 feet in the air. We lost 46 men, 7 officers out of 12. 46 enlisted men out of 88. So we suffered some pretty heavy losses. But I'm here to talk about it.
And this was when you guys were making a landing at Anzio.
We made them at Sicily, 1 landing in Sicily, 17 into Salerno, and 12 into Anzio.
But this particular experience, when your ship got hit by the torpedo.
That was after that. We were carrying, would have been our 12th trip, and we were carrying vehicles at all, and the men were all up there. Now we're carrying supplies. Mm-hmm. You got to follow the Army. and their kitchens and so forth.
Yeah.
They'd pack up their kitchens and put them on trucks, and we'd take the trucks up there. So you're not always carrying combat loads. First 3 trips were usually combat troops and so forth. But then after that, you got to bring all the supply and the cooks and the
support,
repairmen and so forth. And so a lot of, and we were carrying the British as well as the Americans. See, the British were coming out of Tripoli, and the Americans were coming out of Bizerte, both in North Africa troops. But we were assigned to the British Navy for 4 months, and worked with them, made 5 trips, and then the rest were with the Americans. It's 17 trips altogether into Salerno, 12 into Anzio, and this would have been in fact this was our 13th trip.
So you guys have been pretty lucky up to that point.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned Divebombers had come down, and
we acted as a repair ship because, well, our boys had got out there and got equipment and so forth. So they assigned us as a repair ship, and for 2 weeks after we made our second trip, they assigned us as a repair ship for all the small craft. See, each LST carried 6 LCVP, which would carry 40 men on an invasion, standing up. And those needed help. They needed repairs. They had damage and so forth. And we'd have as many as 6 or 8 of them attached to us, and that made a great target. And you'd see the bombers coming in, never hit them on the way in, because they're coming in at 600 miles an hour. But as they drop their bombs, now they're starting up, and they're slowed down to about 150 miles an hour. We shot 20 of them down. That's when we could catch them, but we got them anyhow. In fact, one of the things that always surprised me, because when we shot the planes down, there were about 50 planes in the air at all times, and we would pick up about 40 to 50 the pilots out of 40 to 50 planes per day with our small boats, and some of them were injured. Half the pilots were Germans, and we took them on board and treated them just as if they were Americans and took care of their wounds and so forth. It was very interesting because I interviewed about a half a dozen of them. The big question I always asked was, how did you enter the service? They said, just like you, we were drafted. Like they were, see, if they were in high school or college, they got to be in the Air Force. If not, they would be in the infantry. So all of these pilots were better educated men, and they all spoke English fluently. So when we'd have maybe 200 passengers, people we had picked up during this 2-week period. And then the very serious ones, we would send ashore. They had a hospital there, but we had 250 wounded men. About a half were Germans and half were Americans. When I say English, the English had as many men as we did. They were in the theater, so from England, Australia, and all the other parts of the British Isles. And I know I asked the pilots, some of the American pilots we picked up, and they said, do you mind? We shot you down. You got in the way. He said, look, the idea is to shoot us down. And if we got in the way, that's our problem, not your problem. You were shooting at the right target. We don't mind. There were 3 pilots, American pilots, that I interviewed, and I asked them, do you mind? They said, nope, that's what we're here for, and thank God you picked us up when we went down. We were picking up, for 2 weeks we were there, picking up 50 pilots per day. That's the amount of dogfights that were going on. But as I say, I was very interested in talking to the German prisoners and asking them, why'd you enlist? I didn't, I was drafted.
They didn't have much of a choice. Huh?
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier too, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had other torpedoes that were aimed at your ship, but they had gone underneath.
We had 2 torpedo bombers that dropped their torpedoes, and you watch them drop them, and then see the torpedo coming at you, and you wait. No explosion. Look on the other side, and it's going on by, going right under us. See, we only had 3-foot draft, and a torpedo goes at 6 feet, so it'd go right under the ship. We had 3 of them do that.
Holding your breath.
You're holding your breath, waiting for the explosion, and then nothing happens. But when we had those air raids, because we had all the small boats, see, they would come in and we'd make a hell of a target. Mm-hmm. We'd have maybe 6 small boats tied up to us on either side of us. Now, that means that instead of, we were 360 feet long, but if you put small boats on 6 small boats on each side in there for repairs, that's a big target. And so a lot of them got hit, but we never did. Never got hit. We always felt that we were, but I'll tell you, 135 times planes dropped bombs on us. And you see those 6 bombs coming and you wait, and they don't hit. Think, well, one more time. 135 times, and not one of those 6 bombs each time hit us. They hit some of the small boats, but they never hit us. So
the 13th trip you took, the one where your ship got hit by the torpedo, was it, you said it was from a German submarine?
Yes.
And you guys were struck by 1 or 2 torpedoes? 2
torpedoes. The night we left, because they were loading us with instead of vehicles, putting the drums on, 1,000 drums of gasoline and 500 drums of smoke oil. So the convoy left without us. So we were out by ourselves. But they had put a screen up to try to keep all of them out. But we left about 5:30. The convoy left at 3 o'clock. We left about 5:30. The last thing is, one of the men from the local command came up and told us that at a certain point, about 50 miles before Anzio, 5 ships in the last 6 days had been hit at exactly the same point. So they figured that there was a German submarine that might be hiding. It would come out, fire two torpedoes, and then so they never could find it. But they were all at the same point. So when we got to that point, we went to general quarters, which on the ship is everybody ready in their battle stations. And we were probably, all of a sudden, the bow lookout says, we're following a wake of something. And he said it disappeared. About that time, the sub had followed to pick our speed and so forth, and then pulled off to the side and waited until we got there. And then put, the first torpedo hit the bow, only took 60 feet off the bow. Second torpedo hit midships underneath all this gasoline. So they said the flames were 700 feet in the air. All of us were burned. I had a sheepline coat on, oilskin, and so it burnt the collar and part of this and my trousers, but were burned, and I put the fire out. But my face and were badly burned.
Excuse me for a minute. It's amazing that he remembers detail so long ago, and he still remembers. It's amazing.
Well, those are pretty dramatic times. They're hard to forget.
What do you remember from when that impact occurred?
Well, the first torpedo, I was a repair officer, and I went down through the quarters, one compartment at a time, to get to the forward of the ship. And they're all watertight, so you have to you seal it and go compartment by compartment. I got to the last compartment up there, and there's water. They took 60 feet off the bow, and it went floating off by itself.
So it's completely detached.
Yeah, but still floating. But anyhow, I could see that, and so I said, I got to report this to the exec. Went to use the telephones, and they didn't work. So I was going back, and I got to the main deck, and then I was going to the conning tower. I was on my way there when the second torpedo hit. And it hit midships, right underneath all the gasoline. It blew up. But I was very fortunate. I mean, you know, I could have had a lot of things. I had a piece of deck plate land on me, and that's how it got my hand bashed in and some damage to my feet. I had 14 bones broken in my feet. The impact, you know, the explosion, it broke all the bones in my feet. I couldn't walk for about 6 months while they healed. But my hand was a big thing. And, well, the burns are what they were worried about. You know, my eyebrows, my hair was all burned off, and all the skin on my face. But I was wearing a coat that protected me. My trousers were burned and damaged, but the treatment was beautiful. I have no scars whatsoever, but we had 46 men, all with burns, and burns are very serious. Well, I don't know, almost all of them, it was just their face and head. But that was bad enough. We all looked like mummies, you know. We had a bandage on your head for about 2 weeks. You looked like a mummy.
So did you have to abandon ship?
What?
Did you have to abandon ship?
Oh, yes. I went into the wardroom, and the doctor looked at my hand. He says, Bob, you're going to lose that hand, but I want to bind it up so that see, these were cut off and that was cut off. He boned it and bind it so you don't bleed to death. But you've got to be in surgery in 5 hours. Otherwise, that tissue will die. We got hit at 2:30 in the morning. And while I was there with the doctor, the skipper gave the order, abandon ship. We're about to roll over. We took a 15-degree to this, it looked like we were going to go right over. So we abandoned ship. I went over the side, and I was going to go down the ladder, but I forgot about all the skin was loose, and I went over backwards. And almost a miracle, I fell between the ship and the small boat. And, you know, they were going like this. Well, they caught the water, and I hit the top of that, and they said I was lifted right out of the water. It was as if God took you and put you in your hands. Almost an impossible thing. But they said they didn't have to do anything. If I was down, I would have been 5 feet down. You know, the small boat had 5 feet sides. It's hard to fish out of the water when it's that deep. But here, I was just lifted right up. And it's just as if God lifted and put you in somebody's hands. I didn't fully appreciate that until about a week after that. One of the fellows came up to me and he said, "Do you realize what happened?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "It was as if God had forced that geyser, which picked you up and just handed you to us. Yes, there is a God. I can't say enough how much I believe. Somebody had a hand in that."
You very easily could have been crushed between the two ships.
Instead of that, I rode the wave, and it pushed me right up out of the water, and they just picked me up. Didn't have to fish me out at all. Miracles, that's all I can say. And I didn't fully appreciate it until some of the men told me about what had happened.
You're in pretty bad shape.
I was very badly burned, and this hand was unusable. The doctor had wrapped it up.
And you said you had 14 broken bones in your...
And my feet, my hands were all both. I had bones broken on my hands. You know, if you cut these off and so forth, this thumb was cut off completely. It just hung there. that little skin flap on this side, that was all. Other than that, it was a mess. That's all I can say. In fact, the doctor said, "Bob, I think you're going to lose that hand. Well, let me bind it." He says, "It has to be out in 5 hours." Now, we got hit at 2:30 in the morning. 7:30 in the morning, I'm in a small boat. The men said, and I was badly injured, so I'm laying down. They said, Mr. May, look, what's that?" And I stood up, a hospital ship. We had seen this hospital, we'd been there for 6 months, had seen the hospital once for 1 hour. There's a hospital ship coming down. We flagged them down, and the fellow said, "Mr. May, you go first. You have more damage than the rest of us." And as I went up the gangway, as I said in the small boat, I had said, "God, bring us home safely." As I walked up the gangway, getting on the ship, they said, "Mr. May, thank God for us," as if I was the messenger. I've never forgotten those words. Thank God for us. And I do. I thank God for that. I'm here to talk about it. Somebody had to have a hand in that. Maybe may sound strange and may say coincidental, but...
Are you going to make a book out of it?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to... Have you written before?
I have writers that are working on the biographies. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's
very interesting.
So I'm very fortunate. We lost 46 men, 7 officers. We had 12 officers and lost 7 of them. So I'm one of the 5 who survived.
At any point, did you think that that might be the end for you as well?
Well, I'll tell you, sitting in a small boat with injured, my clothing had been burned, the collar and my pants were burned, and my hand is smashed. I'm in a small boat about 2:30 in the morning, and you wonder, like the men in the boat, there were about 12 of us in the boat, they said, which way is land? I said, I have no idea. There's an overcast sky. I know we're 50 miles from Anzio, but other than that, I have no idea where we are. When the sun comes up, we'll know where we are, and we can shoot. But at that point in time, you say, we're in God's hands. I don't know what's going to happen.
So did you guys just sit there until the sun came up?
No. Yes, until the sun came up, and that's when we saw this hospital ship come in. But how lucky can a guy get? Who sent a hospital ship 50 miles away? When I went aboard, I said, how did you know we needed you? They said, well, we were 50 miles away and we saw a large explosion. And we were wired by one of the ships there, help. And so it took us 5 hours to go from where we were to pick you up. See, they picked us up at 7:30 a.m., 7 o'clock a.m. I'm on the operating table. I look at the clock, 7:30, 5 hours. I mean, just thank God.
Now, were you conscious while you were being operated?
Yeah, I was conscious. I was badly burned, but so were all the others. Everybody on the ship was burned.
Were you given any morphine or anesthetic for?
Not until, well, when I got aboard the hospital ship, yes.
Yeah, when they were performing the surgery.
At that point, but not before that. It was very painful, but honestly, you're more worried about survival than you are a hand or burns. But as I say, we had 46 men in the hospital ward I was in, a large Air Force hospital. They took us there. 46 of us with burns. They assigned 12 nurses to our ward, and they had to change the nurses every day. because they would change the dressings, but burned dressings get infected very easily, and they would all end up with infections. And so you'd have to bring in 12 new nurses. So we went through about 120 nurses in the period we were there that got infection, and at that point they said, go elsewhere in the hospital. But it was a big Air Force hospital. You can imagine one ward, we had 46 in the ward. I think they were like 56, and 46 were from our ship. But they put us all in one place because we needed so much, and we had 12 nurses there at all times, day and night, taking care of us. Burns are very bad, and what they did, the treatment at that time must have been perfect, because I have no scars, no problems at all. But my face and my hair was all burned off, my eyebrows and so forth, it's all gone. But the nurses gave us excellent care, and hey, we had 12 nurses at all times. They had to bring them from other hospitals, and because once they got an infection, they would take them out and bring in some new ones. We probably went through a couple hundred nurses in that. Well, I was in that hospital for 3 weeks.
Now, the other men that were on that ship with you that night, was that the same crew that you had been with?
Yes.
For all the previous landings?
We had 100 men altogether, 88 men and 12 officers.
So I would imagine you became pretty close with...
Pardon?
I said I would imagine you became pretty close with a fair number of them.
Oh, yes, yes. And I want to say that even though I didn't deserve it, they treated me as though I was a chaplain. And I know I got a lot of compliments from the executive officer and the ship and so forth. He said, Bob, you don't know how much good you did, just listening to the people and counseling them. But I had been in scouting, and I'd worked with scouting, and well, I've had 28 years in scouting, and I thoroughly believe in it. And I think that prepared me for what I had on the ship, far more than anybody else. I knew navigation. I was the only one that knew it. The other officers were fascinated with my knowledge, but I had it. You know, I was lucky, that's all.
How difficult was it for you, and did you have time to grieve and process what had happened and the loss of your friends, your shipmates that you had served?
I don't think it had any effect on me. Sure, I was sad, but I was saved, and they were saved. And so out of, as I say, we lost 46 and 7 officers, 53 out of 100. I did my best with what I could do, and I felt very satisfied with that. No, you don't enjoy having something like that, but if you make the best of it, and I'll tell you, acting somewhat as a counselor and listening to the fellas and kind of helping them out, you do a lot of work yourself. You help yourself. And I know the executive officer was very complimentary to me. He said, Bob, you were there when they needed you. And you may call it a confessional, but boy, you know, well, while I was there, for instance, after 3 weeks, we got mail. 650 letters. 440 of them were to men who I didn't know where they were. Sometimes 6 or 8 from one family. The Red Cross came to me and said, is there some way we could help? I said, would you help me answer? I answered 440 letters. I dictated, and then they wrote the letters and sent them to these. Now, sometimes there was 2 letters from one man, or there'd be 6, the father, the mother, the brother, the sister, the wife, all wrote letters. Any information, because the only thing they got Same thing my wife got, and she didn't know, was he was on a ship that was torpedoed and sunk, and he's injured. But that's the only information they gave him. I know when I finally came back to the U.S., this is about maybe 8 weeks later, I was assigned to a hospital in, I don't even remember the name of the hospital. I was in 7 different hospitals. Hospital in Long Beach, yeah. And my parents and my wife came to visit me. I told them that my hand had been damaged. Now, I had a history of this, which gave me a lot of help. My father lost an arm when he was 14 years old. His right hand, he lost his right hand. So I had watched him, and that helped me. Because one time I thought, well, they said I might lose my hand, but 5 plastic surgery operations have put it back so that cosmetically you can't even tell. It's not much good. But they gave me this, which, see, I can pick up things. That's the most important thing. 5 plastic surgery operations to sew this back up and put this hand back in order. May not see it, but there's 5 surgeries there, 8 hours each time, 6 doctors. Hand surgery is some of the most difficult surgery because, for instance, to hook this up, they had to go all the way up here and pull the tendons all the way down and then hook them up to give me this. But it gave me that. And so I can pick up things. The most important thing. I'm a lucky guy, that's all I can say. Everything worked out. And I'm very thankful that it did. But also quite an experience.
Now, if there was anything that you could say to those sailors that didn't survive that day, what would you say to them?
You did your bit. Thank you. As I say, we lost 7 officers and 46 enlisted men. Everyone that survived. We didn't have anybody that, for instance, in a small boat, when I was picked up in a small boat, they asked me, Mr. May, which way is land? I said, I have no idea. There's overcast sky, wait until daybreak. Well, I said, let's circle around and pick up. We picked up 10 more men, 6 of which were still alive, 4 were dead. And they all thanked me for having made that decision that go out and pick up survivors. When we went aboard the hospital ship, their comment was, thank God for us. And those words still ring in my ears because I was able to help a little bit. You look back and you say, why did you do it? How did you do it? Why did you do it? And you did what was necessary at the time.
And what was the date that this took place? Was this in
February 10th, 1944.
44, okay. And then you said you ended up back in the States about 2 months after?
Yes.
And how long was your recovery time until you were?
I spent 10 months in the hospital. I spent 7 months. Then I went to duty. My hand, they had not hooked my thumb up and hadn't done the rest of the surgery, but they said they had to let it heal enough. So I went back and I taught at Notre Dame for a year. Then I went back in the hospital for 6 weeks where they sewed this and hooked this up so that I had that. And so it gave me that. Then I continued, I taught at Notre Dame for 4 years at the Midshipman School. Good duty.
You going in the Army? You going in the Navy?
I am not, no.
Oh, Desire, huh?
So, do you remember where you were when the war in Europe ended?
Yep. I was on his train. And I was on my way back. I was teaching at Notre Dame. and I was on the way back to Cleveland, Ohio, where I came from. And they announced on the train about halfway between South Bend, Indiana and Cleveland that the war was over in Europe. A lot of celebration, but it meant that part of the war was over. And then, of course, what 3 months, 4 months later, Japan. But, and the strange thing is that I was on duty. While I taught, each of us had to stand duty every 4 days and stay on the base. We had a barracks, but then the base. And I had to stay in the enlistment quarters overnight. So I was unable to celebrate.
How did you feel inside, though?
Thank God. That's all I can say. Thank God. Very fortunate. And I thank him for all the wonderful work the doctors did. It would be it's impossible. When I was in the hospital for about 6 weeks, had a cast on this hand, and they shipped me from Naples to North Africa, Bizerti. And I was there about, a week. I was on my way back to the States. I was in 7 hospitals, actually. But on my way back, and 2 of the doctors says, you've had that cast on now for you're supposed to be on for 90 days. You had it on for 75 days. We're going to open it up just to look at it and see if there's anything we should be doing. And they put a blinder here so I couldn't see it. Let me see what you're doing. I want to see what it looks like. I hadn't seen it. All I saw, I knew what it was when it was bound up, but after that I never saw my hand. And so they have it like this. Can I see it? No, you can't see it. And I said, they looked, and the 2 doctors looked at it. Oh my God. And what did they see that they would say that? I said, what is it? They said, it's a mess. Can I see it? No, you can't see it. And they buttoned it up again. But they're coming. Oh my God. That's all, both of them. So it was a mess, I have to admit. But I'm very lucky. You know, I can pick things up and...
Bob, what's today's date? You know today's date?
Yeah, look at the 27th?
The 27th.
Yeah, 27th, yeah.
Thank you.
Tuesday.
It's funny how you lose track of the days. That's why I'm trying to mark them on the calendar.
They just all blend together now.
Yeah.
What are we, 18?
When you're going to work or
The
going...
year is 18?
Yes.
Going to
Don't
school.
blink, though. It'll be
You're very aware of it,
2019.
but when you're at home doing nothing.
So if you had any advice for my generation or future generations, what could you offer?
Go into service for a couple of years. Best training in the world. You learn yourself how to take care of yourself and how to get along with people of various means. I had no idea how the rest of the world worked. I lived in a community that was well-to-do people. I went to a school, a high school, a college that were that level. But when you get into service, you're with people of all kinds, all makeups, all backgrounds, and it's an amazing appreciation of the human race. And you appreciate how lucky you are to be some of the selected ones. I was able to go to college. I was able to exist, and I was able to go to war and come back. I just thank God. That's all there is to it. And this is, well, I don't know how many men. I know, I heard a comment once about every man that was in the Army and in the trenches became a believer. And when I was on the ship, because I acted as a chaplain, I probably talked to 40 men, maybe 50, I don't know. Various educations. We had some men that had a third grade, that's all. 85% of our men on our ship were draftees. Had only been in the Navy a month when they were assigned to the ship. So they had little training. I would say the average sailor had a 4th or 5th grade education. Now, one of my men, for instance, had 1 year of college. Out of the 36 men that reported to me as first lieutenant, they came out with a word that ships at sea could recommend some of their men for college. And so I had to find out what they all were in. And the average school was 5 years, 5th grade. I had 4 ship fitters, good welders, great men, went through the 3rd grade, that's all. That's when you realize what the rest of the world is like. It's shocking. And you realize how lucky you are to be where you are. That's what I learned, and I listened to a lot of men. Believe me, and one man, for instance, one of the Frenchie, the ship had been at sea for 9 months. The day he left, his wife was pregnant, ready to deliver. He got a letter about a month later stating that from the sister-in-law that the brother-in-law had taken his wife to the hospital. Didn't get a letter for 4 months. When we finally got mail, we got 700 bags of mail. I told everybody, let's look for Frenchie's letter. We emptied all 700 bags of mail, and every man on the ship, including the skipper, were looking for a letter to Frenchie. Finally found it. Frenchie, here it is. He opened it. It's a boy. You can't get such cooperation. Every man just wanted to find that letter. But there were 700 letters laid out on the deck. Took about, I'd say, 10 minutes to find one for Frenchie. But those are lessons. They change your personality. You appreciate life. It's different. That's all I can say. And the service is I don't think anybody had the kind of experience I did. I'm just very fortunate to have good and bad experiences. I mean, you know, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that I had experiences that 1 out of 10 sailor had. You know, only one, out of all the men that go in the service, only one sees action. 9 are in other capacities. Her husband, for instance, sorted mail. He spoke fluently in Japanese and 4 languages. So he was good to sort mail. Just as important as my job was, but 1 out of 10 that's in the service ever saw any action. I was one of them, and I'm here to talk about it. But the service experience is marvelous. The discipline that you have to follow, the rules that you follow are strict, but they teach you, and that's important.
And how do you respond when people call you a hero?
How do they what?
How do you respond when somebody labels you as a hero?
I appreciate it, but I don't. I just say thanks. I said, thank you for the compliment. That's all. I don't want to blow my whistle or anything. I'm telling you a lot of things that nobody else knows. Probably, maybe things that Beverly hasn't even heard. I wrote that article. The minister in our church, my wife at that time was very ill, and he came out to see her before she passed away. And we got to talking. He says, Bob, you were in the service, weren't you? And he baited me, and I told him a little bit more. He says, have you ever told this to anybody? I said, no, I haven't. He said, have you told your family? I said, no. He said, you got to write this up and tell them. And so that's how come I wrote that article. They were unaware. You know, I don't brag about it. It's you asked the question, so you got an answer. Perhaps more than what you expected, but I'm very proud of my background. I'm very proud of the Navy. I'm very proud of what I did, and I'm very thankful. And I thank God for having brought me home safely.
Well, I want to thank you very much for sharing your experiences with me, and thank you for your service and protecting my freedom.
Are you in school? You're not in school, are you?